What's up, everyone? Welcome to the June 30th edition of DraftKings Tournament Plays, presented by PrizePicks. I'm your host, Adam Scherer. You can follow me on Twitter at ShipMyMoneyDFS. And as a reminder, use the code AWESOMO when you sign up and make a deposit at PrizePicks. You'll receive 1 free month of Stokastic plus Platinum. You'll also receive a 100% deposit bonus up to $100 on that first deposit. We have a 7-game MLB slate on DraftKings tonight. It starts at 6:05 Eastern, so keep that in mind. Don't miss lock. That typically isn't a good idea. But we have 7 games, including the 6:05 and 6:10 games. So as usual, we're going to take a look at 3 of the top tournament stacks and 3 of the top tournament pitchers using the top stacks tool and the top pitchers tool on the Stokastic.com website. This is an interesting tournament slate. There's a lot of good pitching. There's a lot of good offenses. They are typically facing each other. So it's going to lead to a lot of situations where you're not really comfortable with who you're playing, but you still have really high ceilings, a lot of upside in those teams, and that's going to be reflected in the top stacks here. So looking at the top 3 tournament stacks, number 3, the Atlanta Braves are taking on Aaron Nola tonight in Philadelphia. Certainly a very, very difficult matchup against Nola. He has a 29.2% strikeout percentage, 2.88 xFIP so far this season, but Atlanta is only projected for 2% ownership. They have a 6% chance of being the top scoring stack, a 3% chance of being the top value stack. They have a 115 WRC plus and 203 ISO on their active roster. So certainly plenty of upside here if they happen to get a bad Nola game. And on top of that, Nola is also projected for about 60% ownership himself. So if Atlanta does well and gets to Nola early and often, you're going to be in a really, really advantageous situation. Number 2, New York Yankees projected for 4% ownership with a 6% chance of being the top scoring stack and a 2% chance of being the top value stack. They have a relatively difficult matchup against Luis Garcia, who has struck out 25.5% of hitters with a 3.69 xFIP so far this season. But you could argue that Garcia is the worst of the good pitchers on this slate. And as I mentioned before, most of the good offenses are facing good pitchers. Garcia has also had issues with power this year, which is certainly not what you want to see if you're a pitcher against the Yankees. Garcia has allowed 1.52 home runs per 9. He's also allowed a 221 expected ISO to right-handed hitters. Makes you feel pretty good about Aaron Judge, Giancarlo Stanton, a lot of the power in this Yankees lineup. Not getting much ownership. They have a 118 WRC plus on their active roster with a 198 ISO. And number 1, the Philadelphia Phillies are taking on Ian Anderson tonight in Philly. They're projected for 6% ownership with a 7% chance of being the top scoring stack. Anderson has taken a step back this year in terms of strikeout numbers. He also walks too many hitters. He has struck out 20.2% of hitters. He's walked nearly 12%. He has a 4.28 xFIP. He's still done a decent job of limiting power, only a 156 expected ISO to righties, 111 to lefties. The Phillies have a 95 WRC plus and 163 ISO on their active roster. They are, of course, missing Bryce Harper, which waters the lineup down, but you still have plenty of talent with Schwarber, Hoskins, Castellanos, Real Muto, Gregorius. They also called up Derek Hall from the minor leagues, who's $2,600 on DraftKings today. He has plenty of power as well. So still a pretty high upside spot for the Phillies. Now looking at the top 3 tournament pitchers, number 3, JT Brubaker is only projected for 3% ownership with a 12% chance of being a top 2 pitcher and a 13% chance of being a top 2 value pitcher. He's only $7,500. He's taking on the Milwaukee Brewers. Milwaukee's active roster does have a 105 WRC plus and a 177 ISO, but they also have a 23.5% strikeout percentage, and this game is being played in Pittsburgh, which is a favorable park for pitchers. Brubaker has struck out 22% of hitters with a 4.23 xFIP so far this season. Number 2, Luis Garcia taking on the New York Yankees. I mentioned that I like the spot for New York. I think there's a lot of power upside, but Garcia is also only pulling 15% ownership at $8,800. He has an 18% chance of being a top 2 scoring pitcher. He has struck out 25.5% of hitters with a 3.69 xFIP this year. In addition to the difficult matchup against the Yankees, there is a little bit of reason to be concerned about Garcia just because the Astros typically don't give him a very long leash. You're likely to see him pulled around 85 to 92 pitches. So even if he's pitching well, he's probably just not going to go as deep into the game as somebody like Nola or Joe Musgrove or Luis Severino would for their respective teams. But he's only pulling 15% ownership, so that does alleviate some of the concerns. And number 1, Joe Musgrove, 16% projected ownership, 22% chance of being a top 2 pitcher. He's $9,700 and taking on the Los Angeles Dodgers. This is obviously a difficult matchup for Musgrove. The Dodgers active roster has a 110 WRC plus a 21.7% strikeout percentage, and very good hitters top to bottom. But that's really the case for other pitchers that are getting ownership today as well. Nola's got a tough matchup. Severino's got a tough matchup. Just mentioned Garcia in a tough matchup against the Yankees. So there's no reason not to look to Musgrove here at a fraction of the ownership that pitchers like Severino and Nola are getting. So to recap, the top 3 tournament stacks: number 3, the Atlanta Braves; number 2, the New York Yankees; number 1, the Philadelphia Phillies. And the top 3 tournament pitchers: number 3, JT Brubaker; number 2, Luis Garcia; and number 1, Joe Musgrove.